What Nikola Jokic is doing should not be normalized. We should not be desensitized to his dominance. Early in this NBA season, not only is the Joker on his way to possibly snatching a fourth MVP trophy, he is solidifying himself as one of the greatest this game has ever seen. And in the first game of the college football quarterfinals, it went exactly the way we all thought it would. Boise State tried their hardest to put up a fight, but plain and simple, there's just levels to it. We're talking NBA, college football, NFL, all that and more coming up on the Vance Barnes Show. Man, what is up? What is up? You already know what it is, man. Welcome to another episode of the Vance Barnes Show. I am him. He is me, Glitch in the Matrix, your host, Vance Barnes. I appreciate you guys tapping in with me. Man, Happy New Year. Happy New Year, man. It's 2025 and we get into it. We get into all of it. But I want to start the episode off. I want to start the show off by talking about something that we need to shed light on, right? Something that we need to talk about that I'm like, this can't go on for any longer without people just letting it go like it's the regular, like it's the normal. The NBA season relatively has been quieter than usual, right? Obviously, each year the season's just quiet because of the NFL, then the playoffs start to pick up, and we know that the NBA doesn't really start to make a lot of noise until until All-Star break and after it, right? Football season's done, the Super Bowl's over with, and now it's the NBA's time to shine. But even with that, the talk about the season hasn't been about one player or one team. It's just basically been about how the talk around the NBA has been about how the NBA is so quiet. Viewership is down, it's declining, what's wrong with the game? That's just been all the talk, right? There hasn't been a ton of notable performances. We're not talking about one team. There aren't a lot of memorable performances from players. Like off the rip, I can think about the Cat return to Minnesota game where he had 30 and 20. There's been a few games that Giannis has had over the time, bringing the Milwaukee Bucks back into contention. But other than that, there's not one sole player that we're looking at that has been heads above the rest of them. But I refuse to let go. And I refuse to let this go and let this continue to be overlooked, which is the fact that Nikola Jokic is quietly putting together one of the greatest seasons we might ever see in the history of the NBA. And not only is he quietly putting together one of the greatest seasons, has been and is currently putting together one of the best careers and resumes that a player has ever had, right? He already has 3 MVPs. In another year, he finished second in MVP voting. The guy could easily already have just 4 MVPs. So it's hard to fathom that this guy could get any better, right? You're a 3-time MVP. You're one of the top 5 center to play this game. How is it that you could get any better at your craft? It's kind of like Lamar Jackson, right? We look at this guy in the NFL, and he's a 2-time MVP. His game has just gone from a guy who came into the NFL, and they were like, can he even play quarterback? Should he play receiver? Should he play running back? And then he just skyrockets, shuts everybody up. He's a 2-time MVP, an icon in the game of football. And it's like, how can this guy get any better? And then 2024 hits and he just takes off. And his game goes to a whole nother atmosphere. And he reached deep into his bag of tricks and pulled out what seems like another gear that we've never seen before. The same goes for Nikola Jokic. His legacy is already set, right? I talked about it. He's a top 5 center of all time. He's up there with the greats. How much better can he really get? Well, he's showing us. To start the 24-25 NBA season, Jokic is averaging 31 points, 12.9 rebounds, and 9.5 assists per game. While obviously leading the Nuggets in all of those, the Nuggets are 5th in the West, I believe. This is a career high for him in points, and it's second, like just below career highs in rebounds and assists. And the career high in points isn't even close. I think his next closest was like 26, high 26s, and he's averaging 31 points a game this year. In year 10, at the age of 29, it's almost a guarantee that when he goes to hang it up, we will never see or we will never hear from Nikola Jokic ever again. You know why that's a guarantee? It's because he's in the prime of his career right now, and we don't see or hear from him now. So why do we think we're going to hear from him when he's gone or when he's done? But I said to say is that he will go it shouldn't go unnoticed. It shouldn't go untalked about that he's quietly one of the most skilled athletes on the entire planet, right? I didn't just say athlete, right? Because athletic and Nikola Jokic don't go in the same sentence, right? He can't jump out the gym. He's not running down the court past the best of them. But at his craft, at the game of basketball, playing the game of basketball, there aren't many to do it better than the Joker, right? What he's doing now, how he's dominating the NBA, how he's dominating the league needs to be talked about because obviously his game isn't sexy. The average person is not going to talk about it. The average person, I talk about this all the time, how the NBA tries to create faces of the league and they're trying to look for the next star. It was never in question it was never a thought like, hey, how about this number 15 from the Denver Nuggets? His game's not sexy. Nobody's running to go watch Nikola Jokic play the game of basketball. But when his team is playing a marquee matchup, and when you do watch him play, it's impossible not to recognize his greatness. There's nothing flamboyant. There's nothing flashy about him or his game. He just knows how to get buckets, and he can see the court with the rest of them. He can see the court with the best of them. His basketball IQ is through the roof. And it's different, right? It's a different thing than what we're used to seeing. It's different than what we're used to getting because when we look at the greatest big men of all time, literally and physically, there have been some larger than life people, obviously, but then larger than life personas and just games that have come with it. When we look at a guy like Shaq, who is obviously larger than life himself, great personality, he's as out there as you can get, commercials all over the place, he's marketable, he's funny, he was the most dominant player of all time, right? Then you look at Wilt, same thing. If he not played in the 50s, we might have seen more of him, but you hear the stories about how he was just this dominant, he's out there, great personality, again, larger than life. And then you get guys like Kareem and Bill, who, again, not flashy, not flamboyant. And by Bill, I mean Bill Russell, RIP. Need to put some respect on his name. But when you look at Kareem and Bill Russell, their games weren't flashy. There was nothing sexy about them, but their activist work off the court, what they stood for and the time that they stood for it, again, it was just larger than life itself. And then Hakeem Olajuwon, finesse, pretty game. The list goes on of the great big men that we can talk about. But after Jokic's third MVP, we were forced to put him in that mix, right? It was you can no longer deny it. As much as it sounds crazy to say, as much as it sounds blasphemous to some people, you were forced to put him in that conversation of, is he a top 5 guy of all time? And me personally, I had to take Bill out. Like I said, RIP to Bill Russell, a legend, an icon. I had to take him out and put Jokic in just because of resume and what he's done. I know Russell's got 11 rings. I know all that. But if I'm watching the game and I'm just looking at it, I'm looking at the competition that Bill Russell probably played against at 6'9", and then I'm looking at Jokic do what he's doing right now. My thing was, hey, I'm taking him out and I'm putting Jokic in. But it's again, it sounds blasphemous. It sounds weird to think about because those are, when we talk about Shaq, Wilt, Kareem, Bill Russell, Hakeem Olajuwon, those are some of the most iconic names, right? Forget basketball. Those are some of the most iconic names in all of American sports history. And then there's this guy from Serbia, Nikola Jokic, right? But don't get it twisted. Do not get it twisted. He has earned absolutely every right to be in that conversation. His name deserves to be alongside those greats. He has earned all of that, right? And he's on his way to a 4th MVP trophy if it keeps going like this and the Nuggets keep winning games. There's obviously some guys, and we're going to talk about them a little bit later, who can prevent that 4th MVP trophy. And it's ironic that I brought up the point about Lamar Jackson because just with Jokic and the year that Embiid won the MVP, that you could argue that the voters probably got a little bit of voters fatigue. And the same thing with Lamar this year and Josh Allen. There's a great argument to be made about who should win MVP in both of those guys, Josh Allen or Lamar Jackson. But the voters might get voter fatigue in voting for Lamar Jackson. So it might just go to Josh Allen. This is the same thing. Jokic, is on his way to doing something incredible. And the only thing that might prevent it is either somebody absolutely taking off like an SGA or a Giannis, or voters just have it saying like, hey, I'm just tired of voting for you. No more. When we look at Jokic, though, the real question is, will he be able to lead the Nuggets to their second championship in the last few years? Right? I mean, again, he doesn't care about those trophies. He doesn't care about those individual accolades. They currently sit fifth in the West. The West is stacked as usual. It's going to be a gauntlet to even get to the finals this year. But the thing with this year, though, is there's teams like Houston, there's teams like San Antonio who have come in to now join in on the fun. Two young teams that we knew eventually would get here. Two young teams that we were looking forward to being contenders and being in the playoff mix. Like, we knew we would get there. I don't think we knew they would get here this fast, especially with San Antonio. But the NBA is not complaining because they need so desperately for Wemby to be playing on the playoff stage. Um, but it makes it even harder for the Nuggets to get back to where they want to get to. Honestly, I have no idea if they can pull it off. I'm not gonna lie. I think it's too early. I think the NBA is just too unpredictable. Injuries happen, trade deadline stuff happens. I think although their roster hasn't changed a whole lot since their championship a couple years ago, it's still just too early in this season to say, hey, they have a legitimate, or they can go and repeat this thing, or they can win their second and third year, I should say. Right? The NBA is predictable. The standings right now won't look like they don't look anything like they'll look like in April. And I know that for a fact because it happens every single year. Somebody takes off, somebody goes out. I mean, you look at the playoff spots in the West right now. Phoenix isn't even in the play-in tournament right now. The Lakers are still pretty low, but they might stay low. The T-Wolves haven't really caught their stride yet, so we'll see where they go. There's so much moving parts that if you want to know if I think the Nuggets can win another championship, come back and ask me in March. I'll have a better answer for you. I talked about it earlier, or just previously, about one guy that could possibly prevent Jokic from winning his fourth MVP trophy, and that would be Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. SGA is having a monster year. Absolutely tearing up the scene, tearing up the NBA. 31 points, 6 assists, 5 rebounds, and OKC currently holds the number one spot in the West. Again, a guy that could be on his way to winning his first MVP trophy and preventing Jokic from winning his fourth. Just a smooth player, man. Honestly, you can't pinpoint one thing about his game that makes him special. There's just so many things. It's so well rounded. He gets to the bucket. He can score from all three levels. His ability to pass and see the court. It's just crazy when you look back at the Paul George trade. When you look back at the Clippers and OKC trade that they made for LA to bring in Paul George, hindsight's obviously 2020. But now it looks like OKC absolutely has a time traveler. It looks like OKC is in cahoots with the Simpsons, and they could 100% see into the future because it seemed like every single asset they got from that one trade is now a key piece in their championship contending roster. Who knew SGA would go on to become one of the best players in the entire league? And then they would go on to draft both the Williams guys. They would go on to draft Giddy, who probably would still be there had it not been for some of the off the court BS that he had to go through. Chet Holmgren, again, they look like geniuses in this trade. And what did the Clippers get out of that Paul George? Absolutely nothing. The same thing that Philadelphia 76ers are getting out of him. Absolutely nothing, right? A conversation for another day is that SGA, while he is a great player, one of the best in the league, he's not necessarily a guy that the NBA can market. He's not a guy that's going to ever be the face or, even maybe one of the faces of the NBA, even though he's such a great player. A big part of that is due to the fact that he plays in OKC. There couldn't be a smaller market in the NBA than Oklahoma City. And yes, I know the first thing off the top of your head is, well, Vance, KD and Russ were able to do it. Ask yourself when you ask that question, is SGA Kevin Durant or Russell Westbrook? No. They were one of ones. They were special type players who both brought something that we've never seen to the game of basketball before. So, yes, they were able to take OKC and put them on the map. Kevin Durant, obviously a top 15 player ever, absolute walking bucket, arguably the best scorer of all time. Russ was a walking highlight every time he touched the rock, an uber athletic point guard. Like, look at NBA history. I know Russ has been kind of now having a jump with the Nuggets a little bit. He's been starting, he's been getting off the bench. He started the last few games, and he's been Nuggets are like undefeated, I think, with him as a starter. But there's the running joke about Russ and his play and about his downfall from MVP to going to Houston and then the Lakers and the Wizards and then this and that. There are few uber athletic point guards in NBA history. Your Russell Westbrooks, your Derrick Rose, your Ja Morants. And there's a reason why all three of those guys were extremely likable, were extremely loved, were extremely marketable. It's because there's something just about a 6'1" to 6'3" guy who can jump out the gym, heads above everybody else. He's out here grabbing boards, blocking shots. Everybody loves to watch them. And Russell Westbrook was that. And I'm best believe he's going to get his flowers every time I talk about him because he deserves it. Either way, SGA doesn't fit the bill on any of that. He's not Kevin Durant. He's not Russell Westbrook. He's got a nice game. He's one of the best players in the league, so don't get it twisted what I'm saying. And I know that the NBA wishes they could market him more. I know he's got the fashion thing going for him. Outside of the league, his fits coming into the stadium, into the arenas, fire, right? Absolute fire. And what he does, his niche is absolutely great. But he's not a guy that the NBA can push to the masses and say, hey, this is our guy for the next X amount of years that will put butts in seats and bring eyes to the television, right? He's not a Ja Morant. He's not an Anthony Edwards, but he's a great player, an amazing player. I don't even want to downplay that. As we go from the NBA, now we're going to go talk about some college football. Penn State, we got the first game of the college football quarterfinals last night. And just like everybody thought they would, Penn State got rid of Boise State, just like everybody outside of the state of Idaho, everybody outside of the state of Idaho knew they would, right? Penn State got Boise State up out of here, and there's really nothing to break down. There's nothing to dissect here. There's nothing to overthink. Everybody who watched the game saw the exact same thing that I did, which is there's simply just levels to this, right? It's something that we've known, something that we've been talking about as the college football playoff has gone to 12 teams, is there's just levels to it. It was 31-14. Penn State obviously got the dub. There was never a point in which Penn State was in any real danger. They never broke a sweat. They never had to worry. Even when Boise State brought it within one score and it was 14-7, it was just, right, Penn State never looked like they were sweating anything. Ashton Jeanty, the pride and joy of Idaho, the best running back in the nation, the Heisman runner-up, a guy who many believe deserved the Heisman, a guy who statistically put up one of the greatest seasons we've ever seen in college football history. You know it's a long night for you and your squad when that guy's averaging only 3.5 yards per carry. You know you're just outmatched when he can't get anything going. And of course, they had to keep giving it to him. I think he had 30 carries in the night. Of course, they were going to keep giving him the rock because at Boise State, sometimes your best play call is, hey, let's give Ashton Jeanty the football, right? That's the biggest upside to having an amazing running back in the backfield. And I think the NFL, side note, the NFL is now learning that. Remember, I ain't forget, y'all tried to make the running back position die off for a little bit, but I think now people are starting to realize like the importance of a guy like CMC, or even we see the success that Saquon's having. Giants, trash. We see the success that Derrick Henry's having. Titans, trash. We see the success that Josh Jacobs is having. Raiders, absolute trash, right? We see all these running backs now having success in new teams and their old teams being trash, and it's just like, hey, when you have a talented player, you keep them. You have talent, you pay them, right? Because you just can't get that everywhere. You can't get that out of everybody. So back to Ashton Genty and with the upside to having an amazing running back is that sometimes you get bailed out as a play caller. Sometimes your best play call at that moment is, hey, get him the rock and let's see if he can make something shake. Even if it's second and long, even if it's third and medium, like this might be our best play call because he's the best player on the field. But for Boise State, the run game just wasn't there. I think he had 30 carries, 104 yards. He had one nice long run for 26 yards. Other than that, it would have been a even worse night for him. He had 2 fumbles, one that they lost. And Boise still had a chance. Like, they had a nice couple of drives they got 0 points out of. And that's what I mean by Penn State was never in any sort of danger. They were never in any worry because Boise State scored on the throwback, right? They scored on the throwback, and then Penn State came back and answered right away. And it was like, all right, what are we doing here? Right? A big indication for me that this wasn't a championship team. A big indication for me that, hey, you guys are just outmatched and outplayed in this whole playoff thing is that their wide receivers were getting little to no separation at all night long. And I know that's like, if you're watching this or you're listening, you're not like the biggest football geek or nerd, you can understand a little bit that wide receiver separation has a lot to do with skill. You don't have to be fast. You don't have to be big and strong. You just have to be able to run routes and get open. But at the college level, athleticism does have a lot to do with it, right? It does have a little bit more to do with it than at the NFL level. But a lot of passing yards came off of just honestly great play calls. I just talked about the tight end throwback that they scored off of for 53 yards. But whenever Penn State was just manned up on them, whenever Penn State was like, hey, mano y mano, we're going to put pressure on the quarterback, we're going to play you guys manned up, it seemed like the defensive backs for Penn State were making a play on the ball every single time. And they had those Boise State wide receivers just locked up in jail with handcuffs on. Usually the biggest determining factor in college football, whether or not you're outmatched or not, is the trenches. O-line, D-line, right? The biggest gap between Division II and FBS and FCS and Power 5 is not so much the skill positions, right? It's not so much the players on the outside. It's the guys in the middle. O-line, D-line, quarterback. It's the size of the lineman, and it's how good your quarterback is. That's the difference between, that's the biggest determining factor in how outmatched you are in college football. But again, is anybody really surprised? No. Did everybody think this was going to happen? Absolutely. Were people hoping for it was a decent game. Don't get me wrong. I'm not gonna shit on it like I was shitting on the first round of the playoffs that were absolutely terrible. Like, it was a decent game. I sat down, I watched it New Year's Eve. It was okay, right? It was good football, but it was exactly what we thought would happen. And if we're being completely honest, if we're being dead serious, Penn State didn't look that great either. Penn State looked a lot better in their loss to Oregon in the Big Ten championship than they did against Boise State. Now, maybe that's just a bad day. Maybe they played down to their level of competition, which we see all the time, but they didn't look great, right? I know Oregon watched that game, and the fuss has kind of been Oregon got shafted. They got the number 1 seed, and now they got to play Ohio State or Tennessee. So what type of reward is that for getting the number 1 seed and going undefeated? I know Oregon watched that game and they said, man, we would have gladly took Penn State again, rather than Ohio State team that they have to see tonight, right? And when we look back, again, it's the first year of the 12-team playoff. There's a lot of things that they need to fix. When we look back, this is going to be a huge playoff as determining what will happen in the future and how they'll move forward with the bracket and how they can get better, because I don't have all the answers. You or I don't have all the answers unless you work for the college football committee and you're watching this, but we obviously don't get paid to do it. But I do know one thing. I know the seedings were terrible. And I wholeheartedly believe that there aren't 12 teams in college football worthy of competing for a national championship. We saw it in the first round. We saw it in the discrepancy between Boise State and Penn State, just a Mountain West team and a Big Ten, and then one of the best Big Ten teams even. It's just sometimes it's just not close. And I get there's some outliers. You're hoping for better games, but at least the playoff committee or college football just as a whole can look at back at this when it's all said and done and be like, hey, what can we do better? What can we make better so that we get better games throughout these first couple of rounds so that we're not just saying, hey, we got a 12-team playoff to say we have a 12-team playoff. Because if that's the case, you guys could have lowered it or stuck to your 4, for just being honest. Speaking of college football, man, crazy. The Sugar Bowl, they postponed it. Somebody ran through the crowd, killed 15 people, man. RIP to them. Prayers to their families. Again, I started at the top of the episode talking about Happy New Year's 2025. With that being said, you gotta, man, stay up. Stay up, man. It's a spooky world out here. It's a scary world out here. Sometimes people acting crazy, going insane, just doing crazy stuff. So, man, prayers out to them and the people who lost somebody in that tragedy. Just gotta, man, you don't know what to say. It's just somebody decided to wake up that day and act crazy. So you just gotta stay prayed up. You gotta just stay out the way, hopefully. Stay out the way. Last but not least, I'm upset that this is happening only because I'm more upset because Eric Dickerson came out and just was like, I don't want Saquon to break it. Yes, everybody who's ever had a high school, college, pro record, records are meant to be broken, right? Anybody who's ever had a record set in their life doesn't necessarily want it to go away. They're not happy somebody broke it, but I think they should be happy for the person. Me personally, I had 100 meter, 200 meter relay records in my high school. They got smashed a couple years ago. And I was like, you know what? They got held for a while. I'm happy. I'm happy that the guy saw my name up there and shot for it. He set a goal and he shot for it every single day. And now some other kid's gonna come around and shoot for it every single day when they see his name, right? Was I necessarily happy they got broken? Absolutely not. And I was a little salty. I'm like, damn, my name's not up there no more. But you're happy for the guy. And you're happy that of the time you could spend with your name or your record being up there as number one best to ever do it at this particular thing. So Eric Dickerson coming out and saying, I don't necessarily want him to break it. Bro, you don't have to say that. You could lie to us just like Kareem was lying the whole time Brown was going for his scoring record. And we could just know, we know you don't want him to break it. Just human nature. But because Eric Dickerson went out and said it, now I want Saquon to break it even more. But the Eagles are not letting Saquon Barkley break his record or go for it. They're resting him because they had nothing to play for. They're already in the playoffs. Their seeding is clinched. And while I understand it, I'm just like, man, you can get hurt doing anything. Saquon could, God forbid, get hurt walking down the street. He'd get hurt slipping in the facility, getting out the cold tub. Yes, it's a higher chance of you getting hurt playing in a football game. But if you're gonna go out there and blow your knee out in that game, the likelihood is you probably were gonna go out and blow your knee out in the next football game that you played, right? It's not just because you played on January 7th at 12:35 p.m. that you were gonna blow your knee out. Like, no, it was going to happen. So for his sake, I wanted him to break it. I wanted them to give him a chance to, or at least see where he was come third quarter. But I get it. 101 yards is not it's not a guarantee. It's a lot of yards. It's not like if it was like 50 or something. Then you just get him in there, give him some carries in the first half, let him get it, and then pull him out. But hey, to each their own. To each their own, man. Well, if you made it this far, like, comment, share, subscribe. The best marketing is still word of mouth. So if you loved it, tell a friend, tell a friend's friend. Until next time, peace.